All right.
We're live, David. You can kick us off.
Yeah, I can. We're up to 7 participants who've been enrolled so far, so that's great. And welcome, everybody. We're just waiting for a few seconds for people to come on board. This is the question, furnished or unfurnished? That's what we're going to have to discuss today.
It's quite a polarizing topic, isn't it, David?
Is it? I mean, we actually didn't have a chance to have a bit of a chat beforehand to see where you guys sit on the whole question, so that will be interesting.
Oh, you want to find out where I sit?
Yeah. Well, I hope you're sitting in a chair.
I was going to say, if it's unfurnished, I won't be sitting anywhere.
Good point.
Yes, I thought so.
All right, we're getting up to 11 participants. We're going to start shortly. We'll just give it another minute or so.
Maybe we could take a little opportunity to mention what the next webinar is.
Good point. What is it?
I refuse to answer that question on the grounds that I don't know the answer. I haven't got that far, but I'm sure it'll be a doozy.
That's a black mark against you, Ryan, throwing your co-panelists under the bus.
Yeah, you won't be able to hear my comments from under this bus.
Well, there has been a suggestion put forward, so this is a possibility for something later in the year, but the pool property playbook, a comprehensive guide for property managers on dealing with pools, because that can be a complicated, tricky little situation, I think, with compliance and safety and who pays for the chemicals, who's responsible for the cleaning. So that's one that we might have in the pipeline for later this year.
Yes, yeah. Despite Wellington being number 4 on the most sunshine hours table, we're also on probably at number 1 for the least number of pools to give a monkeys about. So yeah, not many swimming pools in Wellington.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming on board. We're going to get started. I just want to remind you too, there should be a ability to do chat, and yeah, so I'm hoping that has been set up so that that you can actually chat and say hello. I haven't seen anyone yet, so Micah, if you could actually just have a look at that and make sure that the settings have been set correctly. Well, welcome everybody to this great webinar, furnished or unfurnished? That is the question. And firstly, I'd like to introduce myself, and I'll get the 2 other panelists to introduce themselves. My name is David Pearce. I'm the franchisor of Pukeko Rental Management Limited, and I run a portfolio myself so I can keep a hand in it. I've been a property manager for, I don't know, I'll say 23 years so that Richard can beat me and be more distinguished. All right, and now I'll hand over to Richard, if you'd like to introduce yourself to everybody.
Well, hi all, and thanks for turning up this morning. I'm Richard from Manage My Property in Wellington, and David and I appear to have been grinding this particular axe for the same 23 years. So yes, I manage 1 property, and I have a team that manage the rest. So I must be doing something moderately right.
Very good.
G'day, my name is Ryan Weir. I'm the owner-operator of Property Scouts New Zealand, which is this franchise system. Our franchises are based all around the country, as far south as Invercargill and as far north as beautiful Bay of Islands and everywhere in between. Similar to David, I also have a portfolio. It's based in Auckland. That's to keep my hand in the game and to stay up to date on everything, basically force me to stay up to date on everything. And I'm really looking forward to today's webinar.
Great. All right, now to start off with, I'm actually going to try and share a screen. And yep, that's great. I mean, it's actually a report that was done in May 2018 from Barfoot's, and it's just be interesting to use this as a base to actually to start off with to talk about. I'll just move it over so I'm not looking sideways. Can you still see that, guys?
Yep.
Yep.
We can see your email, I think, David.
No, well, that's not what I'm wanting.
That's probably not what you
I
need.
just say yes.
There we go.
Richard, you put me crook twice now. All right. So basically, we'll go through it. At the time in May 2018, Barfoot's was saying that they're looking after 1,500 properties, and 800 of them were tenanted as furnished properties. And these stats are quite interesting because it just gives us a basis to start with. It's interesting to note that they have been charging they've been able to get a rent of between 18 to 24% for their different size bedroom homes, which is great. Most of them being, as we'll go in here, most of them are being one bedroom properties. So as you can see, the great majority of them are one bedroom, then the next one is two, and the rest, it diminishes right off after that. So 1 or 2 bedroom properties, and it's mainly apartments. So those areas like Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, you've got apartments, they seem to be the most attractive. And I actually will just leave it there just at the moment. And the question probably I have for the panelists is, firstly, do you have any furnished properties in your portfolio?
Do you want me to go first on that one?
Sure.
No, I'll let Ryan go first this time.
Yeah, I've kind of got a foot in both camps personally. I own one furnished apartment myself, and I also have some Airbnbs which are fully furnished as well. So yes, the answer is yes. In the portfolio, of which there's about 70 properties, I don't believe any are furnished. There's the odd one that's partially furnished. Over to you, Richard.
Okay. Well, to answer David's original question, we generally don't do furnished, but I do have 2, and that's really by default. It's been an owner who we look after a couple of properties for them, and they have a furnished apartment. I think they're both apartments. I don't do furnished apartments because I see them as being a bit more work than I actually want to do. I tend to do one thing and try and do that to the best of my abilities. But probably something to throw at you all is what defines a furnished property, because you can have furnished, you can have fully furnished, you can have partially furnished. Would you say providing whiteware is furnished? There's a few different angles to it. So I think I've answered David's question and then gone off on my tangent of my own.
Okay, we'll come back to that then. Yes, at the moment, I've got a whole one property, and it was a situation where an owner was going to live in Thailand for 12 months, and he wanted to rent it out, and as is, but again, in that situation was a little bit tricky in that he wanted to be away for 12 months to 18 months. I had to get him to agree to at least a fixed term of 12 months. Otherwise, he could be a situation where they move in and he moves out. Then it's hard to rent it out for a few months. So it's all those things to take consideration of. But I've got a history of furnished properties. And one of them was I took over what happened in Hawke's Bay here was there was a motel unit that was bought out and then sold off individually rented rather than a motel. And I have nightmares about that. With the type of people that we got in there, what it attracted, the short-term nature of it and the work. So that's something we will, I'm sure, discuss as we go through this webinar today. But to answer the question, let's discuss that question right now, partly furnished. I don't personally, I'll kick off, I don't consider that if it's an apartment in Auckland or Wellington or Christchurch or somewhere, and it's got a washing machine, dryer, fridge, and dishwasher, then that's not furnished. It just makes sense because it's stupid to actually be lifting those up and down the lifts. It's furnished is where you could just move in and it's got all the furniture you need. It probably doesn't necessarily mean knives and forks and cups, but I know a lot of furnished do. So what would be your experience, Ryan?
Yeah, I think what you're basically saying is the default position is that the appliances should come with apartments. And I totally agree with you, because if those things aren't provided, not only would the demand slip for those particular properties, but moving those big appliances in, the whiteware can cause extreme wear and tear on the property. The property can get damaged. So the default position should be, it's a very starting position, that those appliances are provided. When I talk about, you mentioned furnished and it can come with everything, I think you said, including cutlery. The terminology I use for those situations, David, is fully furnished. When I use the word fully furnished, that's kind of saying to prospective tenants, it comes with the A to Z. You can walk in with your suitcase and you're all good. You probably can't cook Christmas dinner, but you can get by and have your cereal and your toast and all that sort of stuff. Partially furnished, I think, is the terminology I use, or we use, when it requires further explanation. So we say partially furnished and people go, well, what does that mean? And we say, well, in this occasion, it includes the bed, the fridge, freezer, a kettle and a toaster. So that's used for those situations where it just needs a little bit more explanation.
Right. Yeah, that's cool.
I do have one, as this is a new one we just took on about a month ago. I've got a house in Wellington that has been given to us as a management because the owners can't look after it anymore, and they have, there's a sofa and a couple of armchairs. There's like a Japanese cabinet in the corner of one room, and so that it's, I wouldn't call it partially furnished, but there's optional furniture there, and we've just tenanted it, and the tenants have said, great, we can use that furniture, and that's fine, and the owners can make that furniture disappear if needs be. But at the end of a tenancy, and this is why I don't do furnished, where you've got a dining table and chairs, and the new tenants coming in say, I don't want the dining table and chairs, can you get rid of them? I've got no place to put them. And it's for that reason, that's one of the reasons why we just don't do furnished. It's a complication.
Can I just add to that? I agree with you. I sort of put one of the admin headaches I like to call cherry picking when it comes to furnished properties. And what I mean by that is when the tenant goes, when you're trying to rent a property, it's fully furnished, and the tenant comes in, he goes, I'd like to take this property, Ryan, but I've actually got my own TV. I love it. It's huge. It does 3D or whatever. So that's cherry picking. When the tenant comes in and they say they want to bring one of their own things and you want to make the deal happen, so you agree to it, then you've got this hot potato on your hands where you've got to find a new home for the TV that's already there. So that's one of the headaches that I think can come out of advertising a furnished property.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm just going to go back to that slide again. And we're going to address the question 2, 3, 2, 1. Here we go. Address the question of the cost benefits of furnishing for potential landlords. At this time, back in 2018, before COVID, it's really important to note, Barfoot's are saying here that 80% of their properties in their central branch were furnished. The interesting thing is it says that in a one-bedroom property, supplying the sofa, the dining room tables, the bed, the coffee table, occasional chairs, fridge, washing machine, dryer, that it would cost about $7,500 in those days for actually furnishing a one-bedroom property. Interesting, they're saying that if you take into interest on that money into an additional income, that it would actually take 2.3 years to recoup those costs, which is quite interesting, really, because this does not take into account maintenance or repairs. And of course, that throws a whole lot of sticky questions in. So I just, what do you guys say about that? What do you think? Is it worth somebody spending the extra money for a return of 2.3 years to finish their property if it's unfurnished?
You're looking to me to answer that one. I had a bit of an interruption there, sorry, so I'll defer to Ryan on this.
That's all right. So sorry if you can hear my squeaky chair. In Auckland, as a general rule of thumb, I've found that furnishing a property, as a general rule, can add $50 or $100 per week. But I mean, and that's great for a client, but you've got to link, sometimes you've got to link things back to you. So by taking on a management that's fully furnished, it creates a lot of headache, and it may get that extra $50 or $100 for the client. But if you relate it back to how it changes things for you, that can change things, to the tune of $4 to $8 per week in extra management fee. So you kind of need to weigh up, is that a suitable equation for me? Now, going back to the client, if they invest money to make a fully furnished property, they've also got, and they may look at the extra income they'll get, but they could also think about how they could use that capital in a different way, and maybe they would get a better return on $20,000 if it's put into a term deposit or shares than they otherwise would, getting that extra $50 or $100 a week by fully furnishing their property. So sometimes there can be a conversation held with your client, if they are looking or considering to do fully furnished, about maybe steering it away from being fully furnished and leaving it unfurnished, and they might be financially better off.
Okay. Another question for you guys. What sort of property, in your experience, what sort of tenants are attracted to furnished properties?
That's an interesting question, actually. I would say that that the kind of tenant who wants a fully furnished property is going to be more mobile, and it remains the current fashion for landlords or property management companies to put people into fixed term tenancies. And I've never been a fan of them, to be honest. And now, because you can't kick somebody out at the end of the fixed term tenancy, that's changed the game somewhat. So somebody moving into a 1 year fixed term fully furnished property, they could get a job. I've actually had this happen to me recently. They get a job somewhere else. They want to get out of the fixed term tenancy, and if it's in the middle of winter, they're not going to be keen to keep paying the rent while they've moved out and gone, they're paying rent somewhere else. So I'd say the kind of tenant that you'd attract to to a fully furnished property is possibly not going to stay there for very long.
I'd agree with that. Fully furnished properties do attract short-term tenants. It brings in the transient tenants. Now, as a general rule, one could argue that those tenants may not be as invested in looking after the property as well as someone who has a much longer outlook, who wants to sort of put their roots down and stay in the property for 2, 3, 4 years max. So I think fully furnished properties do bring in the shorter term tenants.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the article from Barfoot's, they say that they attract students and people who are coming from overseas who are waiting for their container of furniture to arrive. So again, it means that there's quite a bit of a turnover. Students maybe a little bit longer, but again, that was hit really hard with COVID. So I don't know how the owners of these apartments have really got on with the COVID, because once they've left, it'd be pretty hard. We've heard of large vacancies. That's the churn and the amount of work involved. With that, do you guys charge? We might have touched on it, but specifically, do you charge a special management fee? How much more is a percentage or something for a furnished property to make? As Ryan said, to actually do the work of managing it is so much harder, especially if you're between tenants.
I'll go first if you like, Richard. The answer is no, we don't charge or levy an additional management rate for looking after a furnished property. We believe that, but as a general rule, furnished properties will achieve a higher rent. So in a way, you get paid through a slightly higher management fee in dollar terms for looking after the furnished property. One thing I also should add is that a big part of managing a furnished property is the exercise of capturing all the chattels in a chattels list. And for that, sometimes we levy an additional fee to reflect the extra work that goes into collating that list. We also give the client the option to collate the list themselves. And of course, they get to save on the fee, unless they get us to do it, and then we charge the fee. So that's how our pricing differs if we are handling a furnished property compared to an unfurnished one.
I agree with what you, the way that you do that as well, Ryan. I think that's good, because we generally don't do fully furnished properties. It's no different, to be honest. I have two, like I say, or possibly three, and I don't want any more. So no, there would be no change in our fee at all.
Okay, then the follow-up question would be, do you guys believe that a property manager can manage as many properties if they are a large percentage of them are furnished compared to unfurnished? Do you see that there's a distinction there, or should they be also be able to manage the same number of properties?
Oh, that's a thorny question, David. I can't give you a black and white answer, to be honest. I mean, my feeling is that if I was going into a fully furnished apartment, just doing a routine inspection, it would take me longer than if it was furnished with the tenants stuff. So yeah, I would expect it to take longer. I don't think you could manage as many. And I mean, even your opening and closing inspections are going to take a whole lot longer. So yeah, you wouldn't be able to manage as many.
I tend to echo some of the statements that Richard has said. But I'll just add to that, not only will the entry and exit take longer, and I'll just tie it back to something you said, David, the churn is much higher on a furnished property. So not only do you have your entries and exits taking longer, but they're happening more frequently. So if I had a property manager with a much higher percentage of furnished properties, we would be compared to someone who's got totally a portfolio of unfurnished properties. I would say that there would need to be an allowance or an adjustment on the portfolio size for the person who is coping with a higher percentage of furnished properties.
You see where I'm going with this, though, don't you? Because at the end of the day, if I'll always be haunted by having a coffee with a lady who resigned as a property manager in central Auckland, who was looking after 300 properties, and now with 40% of them, say, at least furnished, and watching her and her hands going like this, I'm thinking it just doesn't, it doesn't work. So again, the company, if they decide to actually embrace furnished properties, they need to consider the smaller portfolios and the lesser revenue that the company would actually bring in. So because of that, because I think it does need to be taken into account. So what would be the next question? Maintaining the chattels. Whose responsibility is it for maintaining chattels under the new, especially the new legislation that the Labor has brought in about who's responsible for what? What would you say?
The chattels are basically included in the rental amount, so it's the landlord's responsibility to maintain the chattels.
Yeah, and then it gets into that grey, fuzzy, slightly out of focus area where you're going, well, what's normal wear and tear? You know, if you break a wine glass, is that wear and tear, or is it carelessness? And this is why I don't do furnished properties. I'm substantiating my position quite strongly here, guys.
All right. And the reason I'm raising this for the people who are watching this webinar is risk. Because the last dispute or complaint that we had against an RPMA member was about this very thing. It was about a situation where the property was fully furnished and there was a bit of a churn, and then what happened was that there wasn't enough time spent in detailing, checking everything, and unfortunately the property manager was taken to the disputes tribunal in the end and had to pay money back to the owner because they actually didn't diligently check everything properly all the way through. Apparently one of the tenants had taken some stuff with them. They thought it was theirs and then trying to get it back. And again, it's just something that you've got to be very, very conscious of. An idea of it concerns me, idea of renting out a furnished property to a tenant and not doing those checks could actually open up a degree of risk.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely, you'd have to have a pretty comprehensive system. I mean, I've done this again over the years with a couple of furnished properties, and that's why I don't do them. Is that you have to list every cup, every knife, every device, and even Ryan, you mentioned about being fully furnished and having beds. Do you provide bed linen and duvets and sheets and pillowcases, and where do you stop?
Yep, the mind boggles, doesn't it, Richard? So if anyone's doing furnished, you've got to, and you usually allow yourself, say, 1 hour to do an entry inspection, you probably need to double or triple that. Yeah, and if you don't do that and you apply your normal way of doing things of allowing 60 minutes, and then you've got to shoot off to your next appointment, that's when you're going to come unstuck. Because when the owner comes back, it's a bit like what David is saying, that's when you run into trouble because you haven't documented things properly. You haven't found out what's missing. Things haven't been replaced. Tenants haven't been held accountable for losing things.
All right, I'm just going to change the question a little bit this time. What happens if you have a property and it's partly furnished or furnished to a degree, and the owner says, you actually explain to them that they're going to have to replace or repair the chattels and maintain them, and they say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to fix the dishwasher if it goes, or I don't want to fix the TV, or what you guys would do in that situation?
I would come at it from two angles. Number one, I would show them the landlord responsibilities under the Residential Tenancies Act, which will clearly state that they are liable for the costs of keeping the chattels working. It won't state it in that exact language. And the other thing is, I would explain to them that the rental rate we have achieved for your property is in consideration of providing the chattels in a working condition, so that if one of them breaks, we are required to bring them back up to the working condition, because that's what the rental rate is set on. So you can't just wiggle out of it when it suits you. When the $300 bill comes in to repair the dryer, that cost firmly sits in the landlord's camp.
I've got an example. Sounds like I'm moving away from the furnished, unfurnished debate, but I've got an example of a landlord we rented the house out to a tenant. There was a garage, separate garage, and in the garage there was 2 power points and 2 lights and a light switch. They didn't work because they weren't wired in, and the tenant asked if they could have it wired in, and we got a quote of $6,000 to do that wiring. And the owner said no, and the tenant took us to tribunal, and the tribunal said if it's there, it has to work. So you'd better spend your $6,000. So, if you say I've got a fully furnished house, but if the leg falls off the armchair, I'm not replacing it. You can't do that. So to answer your question, David, what would I do with an owner like that? I would try and resolve it, and if I couldn't resolve it, I'd sack him.
Right. That's very good. There are some. I just want to raise. There are some people, and not who actually do provide some extras for properties, and they use a chattel list, but they use a term, a donated item.
Yeah.
So the actual tenant can, and that's included in the chattels, but what does it say? For the purpose of for repair or maintenance, then it's not going to be maintained, but it's there as a donated item for the use of the tenant while they're there, which I thought was quite an interesting concept.
But with that concept, David, it means that title or possession of that item goes to the tenant as well.
No, it states specifically that it's their use is donated. The use is donated to the tenant. So
I thought it was the item is being donated to the tenant.
No, the use is.
I'm with you on that, Brian. I think that's a bit of a have.
Because I've looked into that before,
Okay.
because it's otherwise really trying to contract out of the owner's responsibilities to maintain it through a loophole. But when you donate it, it means that, hey, this item now belongs to you, and therefore the responsibility of maintaining it firmly sits with you. And it would also mean that they have to remove it at the end of the tenancy, unless they want to donate it back to the landlord.
Yeah, it's all in the
I wonder if anybody's listening at the moment that's donating furniture. That could be
it's very important that it's actually spelled out that it's what donation means, because you're right. Anyone who, if it's not explained, they'll just think, well, it's donated, it's mine.
Yeah, and I'll go back to that sort of to that example of the garage. I mean, I've had a couple of owners who've said, look, there's a heat pump there, but if it breaks down or it fails, I'm not repairing it. And I said, you have to. If it's there, it has to work. If it doesn't work, remove it. But if you started the tenancy with it, it has to be working.
Unless it's probably not, it's clearly as a clause not included as part of the chattels.
See, I can't like so I've always said, you know, you have an alarm system in the house, and a new client, and the owner says, we've never had a code for it, it's never worked, we just don't use it, can you write in the tenancy agreement that isn't included? And I always say the same thing. No, if it's here, it has to work. If you want it, if you're not going to fix it, take it away.
Yeah, decommission it.
Yeah,
certainly makes it simple, doesn't it?
I'm with you on
that. All right, guys. I'm running out of questions for you guys. You know, thank you for your time and that what you put into it. But what we're going to do now is we're going to open it up to the control of the people listening to us rabbit on. And there is.
While we wait for the questions to roll in, I just do want to add one further thing, and it kind of links back to that example you gave earlier, David, about I think you had a client, a gentleman, a landlord heading over to Asia for a year or something like that. He had to rent out his house. They are the most highest risk situations. And I'll tell you why. It's because those landlords have a personal attachment to the furnishings within that property. So if anything goes wrong, if anything goes missing, or if anything is damaged, the landlord has a personal attachment. So when you try and deal with that situation, it's going to have an added layer of complexity to it. Yep. The reaction from the landlord may be more significant than if it was just a rental property that they've got no attachment to. So yeah, just to the members watching, if you are presented with those situations, just bear that in mind.
Yeah, and another thing too, which is in this situation, is because his personal stuff, where is he going to put it? So he ended up, you don't get the use of the garage as well.
Yep.
Yeah, that's something I'd like to speak to just briefly. This probably happens to all of us. A new client who says, hey, you can have the house, but I'm storing all my stuff in the basement or in the garage. And my experience has been, if they store their stuff, it's not covered by an insurance, or at best it's covered for 6 months. And then you will not have your stuff insured. So if the tenant sets fire to the house, I've had that happen twice, the insurance won't replace the owner's furniture because it's in a tenancy. So not a lot of people know that, as they say. That's something to be aware of when somebody starts saying, I'm going to use the 4th bedroom as my storage unit. You don't want them as a client. That way lies disaster.
Yep.
No, it's a matter of securing it, and then you're going to have to check on it every time you do an inspection to make sure that nothing's missing, and try and be all wise. Yeah. Yeah. So not all business is good business, I think I'm hearing. I have got a question from Anita. Thank you, Anita, for putting your question in. If a property is furnished, can a landlord replace a good quality item with a lesser quality item if it requires replacing? My understanding is it must be like for like. Now, who are we going to throw under the bus here?
I'd agree with your view there, David. I just wonder what an example could be. Let's just say there's a TV. Everyone can relate to a TV. Let's say there's a 60-inch state-of-the-art one, and it ends up blowing up. And then the landlord instructs the property manager to replace it with a cheap one from the warehouse that's 32 inches. I would say that's not on, and I would say that doesn't qualify like for like, and I would say that the responsibility is on the landlord to replace like for like.
So I'd agree with that. That's a good example as well. So yeah, it would have to be like for like. Is it like a double door fridge blows up and you give them a Scody little beer fridge? No, you couldn't do that.
And the reason is, and I go back to an earlier point, that double door fridge was, believe it or not, built into the rental price that the tenant agreed to pay, and the landlord offered the property to the tenant at that rate. So they're changing the deal if they then go and provide a shoddy secondhand single door fridge. So it's out of kilter. The only way that you could probably do that is if the tenant agreed to accept a lesser quality item, and I'd want to be doing a variation of the tenancy agreement to record in writing, as all variations need to be, that the chattel has decreased in value, or no, sorry, not decreased in value. The quality of the replacement chattel is differs from the original chattel provided, just to cover your backside.
What can I say? I
right,
can't fly in the face of that wisdom.
So webinar attendees, here's an opportunity. We're looking for another question. Otherwise, we're going to have to finish off early. Is there any other things, maybe not necessarily linked to this, that maybe you might like to ask a question? Just go ahead.
I can add a little filler in here. Here's something else that you need to be aware of when you're doing furnished properties, and it probably just does apply to the higher end stuff. So we had a furnished property on our books. The owner did a nice renovation and furnished it with some really nice contemporary wall art, couches, coffee cups, TVs, everything. And it was fantastic 7 years ago. Now you walk in, yeah, you guys know where I'm going with this, don't you? It's not a set and forget situation. When the owner deployed about $20,000 to do that, guess what? It was cutting edge at the time. Today you go into it and you can notice that trends have changed and the things that are there are no longer in vogue. So it's no longer cutting edge. So if they want to stay cutting edge and get best price, they need to almost repeat that exercise again in the coming years because tastes have changed. So it's kind of a never-ending cycle for those high-end ones, potentially.
Yeah, they do need to understand and get some advice from their accountant on depreciation and make sure they depreciate and realise that, it is something that you need to keep up to date with.
Another headache is, in some of these properties, like I had a furnished property and it had a disco ball that would come down out of the ceiling and start to spin.
Awesome.
Wow.
In the same room, it had a projector that would roll down. I'm not sure if you know where I'm going with this, but when a property is furnished with all these gadgets, there is an expectation on you as the property manager. You're in charge of this property. You know how to run this stuff. So have you set time aside to get to know how to run all these gadgets? Are you tech enabled? Are you tech savvy? Because the tenant will come to you and be like, Ryan, how do I get this disco ball to stop spinning when I'm eating dinner? So
yeah,
be aware there's an onus on you to know how to run the stuff that's in these properties that you're renting fully furnished.
Wow.
Closest I can get to a disco ball is a stripper's pole, but that's a different thing.
Well, Ryan takes the cake there. He takes the prize, doesn't he?
I tip my hat to him.
We've had beds that have been able to fold out from walls as well.
Yes.
And in that same property with the disco ball, the landlord was real techie. He had speakers that were inside the walls.
Yes.
Which you've obviously heard of that before, Richard, but very strange. You can't see them.
We've got a new property this year in Johnsonville in Wellington, and it has a cinema in it, and they have 8 leather lazy boys with cup holders and a gigantic screen and a projector and a data cupboard in the hallway, which would make you burst into tears if you opened it and looked at all the wires. And the tenants moved in and said, can you send an engineer around to connect all my stuff up? And the owners had to pay for it because it's there. Yeah, it's amazing.
All right.
A cinema in your house in Johnsonville.
All right, we've got a couple of comments here. Yeah, we'd love to know how you manage a complete entry inspection around about 1 hour. That's and some wisdom from another council member, which says I'd get the owners to write a booklet on all the stuff of a manual of how to do the disco ball. So the disco ball has really become a feature of our webinar. Thank you, Ryan. All right, I think that's about it. I think I'm coming up dry of what else I could ask you guys.
Oh, no, I think you've stirred up quite a lot of things. That this idea of donating furniture and Ryan's understanding of the definition of that's an interesting discussion point. I think I think it is like trying to opt out of the rule book, and you just can't do that.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that document is actually in the Level 4 Certificate of Residential Property Management.
That shows you how out of date Level 4 is.
Why don't we clarify it and we'll post it on the website?
That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea.
All right.
While we've got the members on the line, I just want to remind everyone about the conference.
Yes.
The date that you need to be aware of, everyone, is Wednesday, the 13th of September. And of course, it's at the Jet Park Hotel. And there is an incredible lineup of speakers. I'll just touch on a few of them. You've got Chris Bishop, who's the National Party's spokesperson for housing. And it's a great time to hear, any time's a great time to hear someone like that talk, but it'll only be about 1 month until election day. So he is a really hot speaker to get around, and the stuff that he'll be talking about will be pretty cool. Tony Alexander, he's probably a household name to a lot of people in the country. He will be speaking at the conference. He's talking about the property sector and the economy, which will be amazing. We've also got Serena Gibbon. She is the General Manager of Auckland Property Investors Association. Miles Stratford from, where's he from, David?
Meth Solutions.
Meth Solutions. Raymond Suey from MBIE. And probably the most exciting one for me anyway is the head and the deputy head adjudicators of the Tenancy Tribunal. So they are just some of the speakers. There's another couple there. Rebecca Witt talking about mental health for property managers. So the speakers are incredible. They've been put together and curated for the members of what we think they'll benefit from.
Yeah, but wait, there's more. There's also the awards. You've got till about the 7th of August to get your applications in for Rising Star or Property Manager of the Year for each region. And those ones who are the finalists for the regions, they will go into the draw for the National Residential Property Managers Association Property Manager of the Year. So that's quite exciting. So put your application in, wave your flag, put in some details. The application form has been sent out to everybody. If not, get hold of Micah at admin@rpma.org.nz and get those applications in. It's going to be great. And they will be actually shown at the conference as well. We'll celebrate the success of those leading property managers.
Cool.
Well done.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your time and have a great day. We'll catch you later. Okay.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.